Good evening, and welcome to our second in a series of Zoom webinars with our president, David Farrar. David and I kicked off the series at the end of October, which was just before, I think just before Halloween, which part of me says, what the heck, where did the last month and a half go? I can't believe it's the middle of December already. David is joining us from his home on one side of campus, and I'm actually joining you from my home on the other side of campus, above the, just around Coots Drive. So welcome everyone to join us for our second in a series of our Zoom webinars. So David, why don't we jump right into it? And I'm going to ask you a question. What's new at McMaster since we last chatted in October?
Well, since we last chatted in October, we've finished the visioning exercise. And so we have we went through a process of social media questions for people, and that completed what for me was a several month-long series of conversations with individuals, with members of the academic community, with students, student leadership, alumni, community members, board members, just asking them what was their vision for MAC, where did they see MAC going over the next 10 or 20 years. And what came out of that was a very clear vision of the university and where people wanted to see the university going. And what they wanted was us to address those critically important global issues such as climate change, racism, inequity and injustice, healthcare, poverty, aging. They all emerged as key themes, and the participants were really optimistic about the role MAC could play in solving these big problems that the world's facing, and the transformative power of knowledge to create a fairer and a more equitable world. There was also a clear sense that MAC could play a really important role in Hamilton and our surrounding communities, including our local Indigenous communities. And that really builds on our ongoing community engagement activities and encompasses the entrepreneurial activities, the increased technology and business focused work that we're doing. And so they really wanted us to play a role in enhancing the region. They wanted us to focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that permeated the entire responses that I got. And they wanted to give our students skills to help them thrive in the world we're in. Interestingly, in a virtual world, we got lots of suggestions around flexibility, adaptability, resilience. They wanted us to equip our students with the skills to analyze and solve these complex problems that the world's facing, and to go out and enter the job market with empathy and compassion. So that's what we learned in that exercise, and we're now headed into a visioning exercise that will play off of that as we move forward. Other things that have happened in the last month, if people on the webinar read the daily news, and I encourage you to do that, you'll notice that we were named for the fourth year in a row Canada's most research-intensive university. That means that if you normalize McMaster for the number of researchers, we get more money per researcher and per graduate student than any other university in Canada, and it's been that way for 4 years. Other daily news stories playing out right now are around the Order of Canada, and of the 114 Order of Canada medals that were given, 7 of them were connected to MAC. And so, follow the daily news, stay in touch, and that's what we've been doing for the last month.
Yeah, that's a nice way to end at the end of the year with our faculty and alumni being recognized by the Order of Canada. Okay, I'm going to switch to some pre-submitted questions we had from folks for you. I'm going to start with the first one. So our first question is, how are we thinking about integrated academics as a means to tether practical experience with online learning? And this person who submitted the question also put in brackets after online learning, global platform.
So this is the part of the technology that I don't like, because I really wish I could ask whoever asked that question to tell me a little bit more about what they're interested in, because I can think of many ways to to answer it. The global platform piece, that's the world we've ended up in. We are a virtual university right now, so we have students who log on from East Asia in the middle of the night, and we have students who are studying in Westdale or across the country, and so we are a global university at this point in a virtual learning environment that really does touch the world. But the part about integrated academics and practical experience it reminded me of a couple of things. First of all, in engineering, they in their first year labs have used gaming technology, and so if you want to design a circuit, you can play a video game and with your colleagues, your friends, classmates, design a circuit. That circuit can be printed with a 3D printer, and then robots can measure conductivity. And so you can run labs entirely virtually. And so there's all sorts of really interesting and quite practical learning environments that students can experience. And then the other thing that popped into my mind that's again something that's changed a lot since the university that many of you have experienced. And we now have an intercession course. And so the intercession runs right at the end of the winter term and before the spring and the summer terms start. So it runs in May, and there's enough time to give a 6-credit course over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. So a very intense course. And they tend to be practical and giving students interesting skills. So one of them that I when we'd gone online, that I was part of the first lecture in, was Inspire A1A03, which is hugely interdisciplinary. It looks at the history and the future of Hamilton communities, and explores questions around student life and mindfulness at the same time. And so it's equipping students to enter university. And that's a 3-credit course. And then there are a whole series of what some people call micro-credentials or 1-credit courses that allow students to assemble a theme that comes out of it. So if you are looking at COVID maps, there is a micro-credential in COVID maps. There's another micro-credential called How Maps Lie. And there's a highly practice-based micro-credential on learning how to fly a drone so that you can map things out. So that's how the learning environment has changed and how technology has really changed so much in the last few years.
So if I could just ask a little bit of a follow-up question, David. So for when you talk about the micro-credentials, do you think is that really just for undergraduate students, or does that offer up the opportunity for people who are out and, working and want to come back and do a short little micro-credentials? How does that actually expand McMaster's ability to attract more students?
Absolutely. And what that will allow, the micro-credentials can be skills or specific subject matter. And they can allow students to take, alumni who've graduated to come back, and let's say they needed a specific area, something to do with computer program or something, they could pick up a micro-credential in that. The whole concept of credits, the idea of an hour lecture is gone in this environment as well. And so a lot of the lectures are 15-minute short video segments, and then the students get together on Zoom technology and have conversations afterwards. So the idea of an hour lecture is changing. How many credits a course is worth is changing. There's major transition happening right now.
Yeah. You also make me regret a little bit telling my nephew to not play so many video games, because he may have become an engineer if I hadn't bothered him all that time when he was a teenager. Anyways, our next question is, what percentage of the university's course offerings did you manage to move online, and how long did it take? Once we come out of COVID, what do you expect the complement of online, and in-person to be?
So it seems like forever since we went to a virtual university. The 13th, Friday the 13th of March is 9 months ago, but but I just can't believe how much has changed. So in 5 days, we, on that Friday the 13th, we told the community, we need to finish this term and we need to be virtual, and you all need to go virtual, and you've got 5 days to do it, and then the term starts again. And you've got to figure out how to do assessment, exams, or whatever in a virtual environment. So we went virtual in 5 days. We then switched to a completely virtual intersession and spring and summer session that I talked about, and that the entire session was virtual, and that happened very quickly. People switched over the course of a month to transition those courses. We then had the summer to become virtual for the fall term, and we're essentially virtual now. There are a few courses that have a practical part to them. A number of the clinical placements still have to happen. And so there are some nursing courses and some clinical courses that are practical that students come in for. There are a couple of lab courses that, lab components to courses that students need to come in for. But the large majority of the university is virtual. As you said right at the start, Karen, I live right across from the university, and there are typically 1,500, less than 2,000 people a day on the campus. And so you can probably have that for the number of students, or maybe even quarter it. So not many is the answer to that. We're effectively a virtual university.
So the students are wrapping up their fall semester. I think tomorrow is the last day.
Correct.
And exams start on Thursday. So how do you think it, what's your sense of how the fall term went?
So I'm incredibly proud of the university and what they did. We moved into the virtual environment because it's the only way we felt we could keep our people safe. And we really didn't understand at the start the virus and how it was moving. We know more now. And so we will transition out of this, but our focus was on keeping people safe. Interestingly, the summer school, students actually loved summer in a virtual environment because it gave them the flexibility to work from wherever they were. They didn't have to come in. It actually allowed them more options. In the winter, in the fall term, there's been a range of experiences. Some students have really enjoyed it and found it to be quite an engaging learning environment. I think most students miss the collegial part, the friendships, that aspect of being a residential university. So I think everybody laments the loss of that. The university did a really good job of creating a virtual student environment for students to connect with each other. And so all the normal student services are virtual as well. And I think that's worked out. We will stay virtual in the winter term. And our hope is, or not our hope, we're really focused on learning how to test, trace, quarantine, treat, and so come September, it is our hope that we'll be open again, pretty much fully. I think there'll be more virtual learning than there was before, but probably essentially back online. I think something like first year chemistry will stay, the lectures will stay virtual. I think you can do a better job with technology, but clearly the seminars, the labs will be in person.
Right. So the next question is around the Innovation Park, which I think is a really interesting question, and look forward to hearing what you have to answer this one with. So how important is McMaster's Innovation Park to the university's future, and what are the future plans for the park?
So I think the park is critical to McMaster's future and also the region's future. And universities are about student learning, and they're about scholarly activity. Increasingly, the students want to learn by doing. And so things like the Forge, where students start their own companies up, are hugely experiential learning environments. So that happens on the Innovation Park. A number of our researchers are not as interested as the world was when I first became a faculty member in publishing and in citations. They're more interested in the impact, and they want to translate their research. So people like John Valiant, who uses radiopharmaceuticals to treat diseases and for diagnostics. He has a startup company, Fusion Pharmaceuticals, at the park. And so our faculty are using the space for that. A hotel is going to go into the park. There's going to be some residential space on the park. We bought the Spectator building, and that's going to become a data center. There are huge plans for a bio spin-off, a large bio spin-off lab, and right next to it, a major facility that we've been working on that we're calling Nexus, that will be the Center for Pandemic Preparedness. So MAC actually has been magnificent in the way that it's addressed the virus, the number of things we've done. I'm not just talking about our virologists or infectious diseases, but the Center of Excellence on Personal Protective Equipment, the way people have looked at the inequality of the virus, aging, kinesiology has worked on a number of areas. So the spin-offs that come out of that will also develop around the park as well. So the park, I think, is an integral part of how we will continue to both transform our research and our teaching, but also transform this region.
And for those who haven't been back to Hamilton for a while, the Innovation Park is located on Longwood Drive, so just off the 403. I believe it was a Camco plant many years ago, so we've kept that, and there's offices in there. But it's a great place to see where McMaster is growing. So McMaster is growing in that spot. Any more growth, do you think, in the city in the next little while, or are we going to focus more on Central Campus and the Innovation Park?
Well, it's interesting as we go viral, how much space do you actually need here?
Yeah.
And so how we're using the space here in Westdale is an interesting question. We, of course, have the David Braley Center right in the middle of Hamilton. And right beside that is going to be a graduate student residence at Bay, just between Maine and King. And so there's a lot that's going to happen downtown. We still have our Burlington campus. We still have campuses associated with our medical program in Waterloo and in St. Catharines. So yeah, we're in a number of places.
So now the next question is about tuition. How important is tuition for McMaster's budget?
So tuition is becoming increasingly important for McMaster's budget. If you look at the money we have to provide our undergraduates and graduate students with their education, it's about $650 million that we have to do that. $250 million of it comes from the government in our grant from the government. So 40% of it comes from the government, and the rest of it comes from tuition at this point. And so increasingly, even as much as I would say 10 to 15 years ago, that would have flipped. And so we're increasingly, our block grant's been frozen for a decade. We're increasingly moving to tuition as the principal source of income that supports that. If you look at how tuition breaks out, there's about 400 million that's tuition. About 200 million of that is domestic undergraduate tuition. Interestingly, although only 15% of our undergraduates are international, they pay 150 million in tuition because they're paying effectively the sum of tuition plus the block grant, plus a little bit more for all of the things that Canada has given to our university. So domestic students are an important part of it, but international students are becoming an important part as well, even though they're a relatively small proportion. And then graduate students make up the rest.
That is a lot of money.
That's about half of our operating budget.
Yeah.
Our operating budget's about 1.2 billion. And so the other half is our research activity, all the ancillaries we run, all of those other things that we operate. So our tuition, we're a $1.2 billion institution, and about half of it comes in tuition and block grant, and that's used for education. And the other half is our research and all the other things that we do.
I think when you hear a billion, it's like it's hard to get your head around that. McMaster's a 1.2 billion enterprise, and then the amount of money that spills out into the community it makes a significant impact, I would think.
Oh, we're a major employer. Our healthcare system is the largest employer in the city. And if you look at our students, many of them live in the city. They buy goods in the city. The international students come. They, in some cases, stay and immigrate. And so we have a major impact on Hamilton. If you look at the spec, I think it was today or yesterday, there was an insert that talked about the impact that McMaster has on this region, and MIP, interestingly, was mentioned in that. And so we are increasingly the major player in the region. It used to be steel 60 years ago, but it's education and research now.
Oh, it's a great story. So, all right, our next question is focusing around graduating some students. And all right, here we go. How is McMaster promoting the graduation of a well-rounded individual and citizen? Why don't we offer a required credit course?
It's both a great question and a controversial one, because if you have required courses, and some universities do, the university I was at before McMaster, UBC, required English for every entering student, but that creates huge problems depending upon the programs the students are doing. If you go back in time, my partner Susan's father went to the University of Toronto. Back in the 40s in University of Toronto, you had to take a swimming credit in the 4 years you were at the university. So if you want to get into a general credit, then you get into what is that credit? Is it swimming? Is it English? Is it mathematics? Is it history? What is it? And that just doesn't fit into the kind of way in which our curricula is mapped out now. What we are really starting to do, and what you're seeing more and more of at Mac, is highly interdisciplinary experiences. So a lot of minors where a student can take a minor in sustainability or climate change. And so you're seeing minors in areas that provide students with that well-roundedness that was referred to in the question. And so students get the opportunity through both through a much more interdisciplinary education than we used to provide, courses like business or programs like business and humanities, but also minors that give students the opportunity to do that. I don't think you'll see us going back to a single required course.
Well, I think what always strikes me when I go to convocation and I'm on stage watching the students go across in the program is, you could have a biology student, but their minor is something that would be completely different of when I went to school. And I just think it's just a different experience that students get to choose and do minors in non-traditional disciplines from what they would have gone into. And that strikes me at McMaster. We give that ability for students to have much more freedom in their academic journey.
And you're even seeing it in programs that are accredited and used to be highly structured, like engineering. So engineering have just entered into a new engineering and humanities program as well. And so you're seeing a lot more of that. You're seeing the transition between science and health. You're seeing in social science, digital courses that have to deal with democracy, and so you're seeing an awful lot more highly interdisciplinary areas of study.
And do you think that, I mean, it happens because McMaster is the right size? We always talk about that, right? That we're interdisciplinary, that, that's we're the right size so people can do that. Do you think that's unique to McMaster in this aspect? We usually talk about that in the research area, but I guess it would go across to the undergraduate experience as well.
It is going across to the undergraduate area as well. And I see more of it at McMaster than I saw at the other two universities that I've been at in Canada, UBC and U of T. And so I think it is related to our size. At one level, we've become a very large university. Some of our alum who graduated in the 50s would have graduated with 1,000 students in our university. We now have 35,000 students at MAC now, but we're half the size of UBC and a third the size of U of T. So we're at one level, we are small, but it's a relative term compared to the university that some people on this call experienced. It's become a very large university. But that interdisciplinary nature is really starting to come back and is one of the things we're really focused on now.
So today, as you mentioned earlier, we got the great news that we are Canada's most research-intensive university for the fourth year in a row. And so we have a couple of questions that people have sent in around research. So the first question is, how is research prioritized given the various disciplines?
So research prioritizes itself. We support research in every way we can from the central university. Ways in which we might do that, just to start to answer this question, are research platforms as one example. So increasingly, research requires a lot of equipment if you're in the physical sciences or in engineering or in health, and so research is supported across the university by supporting platforms that enable researchers to do that research that we're talking about. What research is done is really is up to the researchers. And so it is, in the first instance, curiosity that's driving them to undertake research. But I said at the start, increasingly, people are more concerned about the impact of their research than on the publications and the citations that come out of it. So you're starting to see people undertake work that is hugely interdisciplinary and that involves research across the whole university. And so one of the and this space evolves very quickly. So when the COVID-19 virus broke out here, our virologists were the first ones to isolate it in this region. We have a very strong infectious disease area. We're amongst the best in the world in that area. They started to look at the kinds of drugs and that may help deal with the symptoms, but they also looked at ways to detect it. And so some of the research coming out of infectious diseases is now going commercial. It's a saliva test, a very robust saliva test that gives you a very clear answer in a short period of time on whether or not you've got COVID, whether or not you're displaying symptoms. And so a huge amount of work came out of that area. But I mentioned earlier the Center for Personal Protective Equipment, and our engineers got into helping local industry retool. And so research went in that direction. What's come out of that is the area that I mentioned earlier, which is what we're calling the nexus, which is looking at global pandemics and biological threats. And it's a hugely interdisciplinary program. It goes across the entire university, and will, if we can find the resources, end up in our innovation park. And so that's the organic growth of a specific area that happened over the course of the last 9 months.
Does that surprise you, the move from the focus on publications to impact? I mean, as a researcher yourself?
It pleases me. I think in many ways we were trapped in a system that was driving us. It's the old publisher perish paradigm, and was driving us to certain metrics. And those were metrics of quality. I'm not sure that was the right way to think about research. And increasingly, people are thinking about research in terms of how can we affect the areas that the world in the areas that we work in.
So our next research focus question is, what are your plans to build collaborations with industry for research and innovation?
So for me, this is a huge area of focus. And I'd said at the start that we were moving into a strategic planning process. And two of the really big areas that we'll focus on over the next year are commercialization and internationalization. And so our international collaborations, our international partnerships are important, as well as those collaborations that happen with industry, or in many cases, they're the industries that we're spinning off of the university. So when we look at the innovation park that I talked about earlier, that's one way we're looking at providing space for some areas to spin off what they're doing. In the healthcare system, they've been doing this as long as they're around. They're designed to translate their knowledge from the bench to into the clinical environment. And so that's been going on for a long time. Business schools have been doing this for a long time as well. In humanities and the social sciences, you're also starting to see interest in where their scholarly activity is going. Not for everybody, and that's the great thing about universities. This is research that's driven by the interests and the curiosity of the faculty who are doing it.
Do you think universities are better at commercialization these days, or do they have to be better at it?
Commercialization is hard, and I'm not sure. I had this conversation with the VPR this afternoon. There are people who commercialize things for a living, and they're very good at it. Typically, faculty members aren't. And so they need support from the more entrepreneurial side of our communities. And so the innovation and the transfer of knowledge into some kind of application, that's a very specialized area, and it's one that universities have to figure out how to support those people who are interested. A few people figure it out on their own, but most faculty are interested in their research and not in the complex process of taking that research and translating it.
The next question is around climate. I guess I would phrase it that way. What is McMaster doing to reduce the carbon footprint of the campus community?
So the facilities group at McMaster have put into place a plan to be carbon neutral by 2050. I would like it to be a lot faster than that, but it turns out to be a very complicated process. So we will go to electrified vehicles, and indeed, that's an area where we have deep research strengths. Ali Ahmadi in engineering has a very large research group that looks at electric vehicles, and manufacturing electric cars in this region are going to be one of the spin-offs from his research group. We're looking at how we balance load consumption for energy across the campus. We're looking at moving away from natural gas to heat the water that we use to heat our buildings, and to move to more electricity in that. It's complex, because if we move too fast to consume electricity, we'll overwhelm the electric grid in the province, and so the capacity in the province. So the province will have to generate more electricity. And as things stand right now, I think it's something like 97% of the electricity in our province is carbon free, and only about 3% of it comes from burning fossil fuels. A large share of it comes from nuclear, and then a whole range of hydroelectric and other sustainable energies. If we go to electric to heat our water, and we consume more electricity than the grid can produce, Ontario Hydro will manufacture it by burning natural gas. And so, we feel good about being carbon free, but the province isn't necessarily carbon free. So we're working our way through what is a very complex problem about how do we become a carbon free university. So reducing our carbon footprint is incredibly important to us. There are a number of faculty and students who also want us to divest from the large fossil fuel companies. And we're looking at that. That's again complex in terms of how we tease that out of our investments. But it's another area that we're looking at moving into. And indeed, the world is moving in that direction, because hopefully by 2050, we'll be in a effectively carbon neutral situation.
So David, when you talked about the strategic plan, you mentioned that climate change came through in many people's voices through the exercise. Did that surprise you? Or, how do you balance that, right? Like, I'm assuming it was not a surprise to you.
No, it wasn't, because I've talked to so many of our students in the first case, and the students are hugely interested in climate change, and we've made a mess of this world. If you look at how climate zones are moving, how currents are changing, the speed at which the glaciers are melting, those things, I think anybody who looks and reads a little bit recognizes how much of an issue we've created. And if the only way we're going to solve these problems is by focusing in a global way, and in a world that's increasingly fragmenting, universities are the common thread that connects us, and the knowledge in a fake world environment that allows us to work our way through these problems. So I think universities have to provide the answers to those questions, and I've thought that for a long time. Our students care deeply about this, but so do so many of our faculty and our staff.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads us quite well into the next question. What is the biggest challenge and or opportunity facing McMaster in 2021?
So they're both the same, and I talked about it earlier. We have to learn how to live with this virus, and although I'm astounded at how quickly we've come to a vaccine, from a time 9 months ago when RNA vaccines didn't exist. And so, we've not only figured out how to manufacture a vaccine, or how to get from research to a manufactured vaccine, not in 10 years, but in, 8 or 9 months. But we've actually solved major problems about influenza when it comes to vaccines, because as you know, vaccines don't, in the past, there was no vaccine, a common vaccine against the flu.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's quite amazing how quickly we've moved in that direction. But the job in front of us to vaccinate the population is huge. And it's not clear how many people will get vaccinated. So we need to figure out, and we need to tell students and our faculty by May, if we're going to be open again in September. So we don't have a long time to figure out how do we get people back in a socially distanced environment where testing is a critical part. I mentioned that one of a new saliva test came out of infectious diseases, but we have developed several different COVID tests, and the McMaster Health Labs does the testing for Air Canada right now and is capable of doing about 10,000 tests a day, and that's spinning off another company that will be capable of doing many more than that. So we've got to get into testing, tracing, isolating it when we see it. If you look at most university experiences, it hasn't come in the classroom or in the lab. It's come onto the university from spread in the community. So it's where students are either in residences or traveling into the university from. So we've got to figure that out. And that's the biggest challenge for us. But I've already talked about how much the university has contributed to this pandemic and how much it's shaped a whole area of our research. And so there are huge opportunities in solving these problems as well.
Well, and the other thing I would say is that it's been, when you take a step back, it's hard to believe that it's not, almost 9 months, I guess 9 months in a few days that did the switch to 100% virtually, is the way that the campus came together, students, faculty, staff, the community to deliver a great experience for students and great spirit. Like, I think that's the other thing is people, it's been hard, but there's been great moments in it as well.
It has been hard. Mental illness has shown up. Isolation has shown up. And so the community, this has not been an easy time, but the community actually has done remarkable things.
Yeah. Now, that sort of ends the formal question part. And as we wrap up, I've got a few concluding questions for you, David. I don't know if these will be the easy ones or the hard ones. So a series of a few short questions for you. Number one, and I'm sure you're going to like to answer this one. Who is your favorite historical chemist?
Yeah, I do like that one. I lectured first-year chemistry for 2 decades. And so I have to say John Dalton. Dalton, as we moved out of the age of alchemy, the end of the 1700s into the age of chemistry, it was John Dalton who came up with the idea of atoms and molecules, and atoms as an indivisible unit that if it that was the small unit inside of the elements, and that those atoms could combine with other atoms in whole numbers, and that allows you to work out molecular weights and do all sorts of things. And so he really, in the first part of the 1800s, I think it was 1808. He published his atomic theory, and that really laid the groundwork for everything. But like so many of us, he was highly flawed, and he had the idea that that molecules should be simple. And so he had water formulated as HO, not H2O, which means you get the wrong atomic weights. And he created 50 years of chaos, as every chemist who was worth their salt had their own set of atomic weights because nobody could figure it out because of the way in which he'd formulated things. So Dalton.
Dalton. Okay. Next one. What is your favorite holiday tradition?
I would answer that with two things. One is going out and getting a Christmas tree and decorating it, which we did a few days ago, and it just lets you know that the season is coming, and great smells in the house, and the color, and it just signals something really important. And for a long time, Susan and I have gone away to a Messiah concert every Christmas. And when we were in Vancouver, we sometimes would drive down to Seattle and go to the Philharmonic there. And so, really memorable times sitting through Messiah. And that's not going to happen this year.
Unfortunately, no. Your favorite place to travel?
Probably Rome. It used to be London. I spent some time in the UK when I was a postdoc, and I really liked London. But I have a research collaboration with a group in La Sapienza, and I've become quite fond of Rome.
So I guess if I ask you your favorite wine, is it going to be Italian?
No, it's going to be from Niagara.
Oh, good.
So I can't say I have a favorite wine. It depends on, what time of year it is, and what kind of food you're eating, and all sorts of things. But I think Niagara produces some amazing wines, and I'm a big fan of them. Their Cab Franc and Riesling are the two grapes that I think are the best from Niagara. But there's some great wines down there. So, consume local. The last thing in this globalized world we should be doing is shipping stuff around the world. If the pandemic's shown us anything, it's, get back and buy local.
Buy local, very true. And there's lots of Mac-Grads who are own wineries down that area. So there's a plug for that. And our last question of the day, what was your first job?
I put cans on the shelf for supermarket. Was the first job I ever had when I turned 16, and then Dominion hired me away from the small supermarket when I turned 17, and by the time I went to university, I was running the dairy section at university at night. So my first jobs were all stocking shelves in grocery stores.
Oh, well, and we've certainly learned in the pandemic, those are frontline workers and they're very important. And many of us started off in the grocery stores in our first jobs.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, David. That ends our formal questions for this evening. Thank you for spending almost an hour with friends and alumni of the institution. We get to learn a little bit more about you and what's going on at the university. I want to wish everybody a very happy and safe holiday season. Take care. I'm going to say, I hope it's somewhat a little bit more Zoom free for everybody, but knowing that everybody's probably going to have to connect with friends and family over Zoom. But I know on behalf of David and I, it's been a real pleasure to spend a couple of sessions with you for 2020. We've got a couple more coming up in 2021. And I know that in between December and February, there's going to be even more great things happening at McMaster. So thanks, David, for joining us.
Stay safe. And I hope you, within a socially distanced and quarantined world, you have a great holiday.
Yeah. So stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you in 2021. Good night.